And the last one for this month's mailbag is from @DavidGFool on Twitter. And I recognize that handle because that's my handle on Twitter. And I occasionally get to ask questions in the mailbag too. And sometimes I'll even select my questions to answer if it fulfills some of the criteria that I was giving earlier. And so here's what David G. Fool asks at the end of this mailbag. I've seen a lot about market volatility. We hear about China, oil, lots of negativity. Should I stop investing? Well, that's a great question, David. I think it's a natural question for a lot of us to ask is, should I have new money? It's the new year. I've just got my every 2 week salary check. Should I put this in this crazy volatile market? And the answer is yes, you should. And here's why. Because the stock market typically rises 10% or so a year. And you and I aren't going to make great calls. In fact, I don't know of any human being who consistently makes great calls knowing whether 2016 will be a good year or not. But the one thing we do know, just looking out a few years, is that on average, the stock market rises, and really more significantly than almost anything else that I can think of to invest in, that's easy to invest in. Maybe you have some hot real estate property in mind, and maybe it will appreciate more than the stock market in the next 3 years, but that's not that easy to invest in. And for a lot of us, the liquidity of the stock market is just tremendous. Should I stop investing? You should never stop investing. The only time you should stop investing is if you really need the money and you are no longer going to have that money to invest in. That's why we invest. If you do want to buy that house, or if you are retiring, if you're changing things up, whatever you want to spend that capital on, great, go for it. That's why we invest. But you shouldn't stop investing just because of volatility. In fact, to close, it's sort of funny to me that the two big factors that are blamed for the market sell-off, really some of my favorite stocks down well more than 10% over the last 3 months, oil and China. First of all, oil powers so much of our economy, and the idea that it's really cheap, kind of because of a glut, that sounds good to me. I mean, were we all enjoying $4.50 oil prices per gallon? I don't think so. I mean, it's amazingly cheap, and I realize it's hard for that industry, and it stops drilling. And if you're in that industry, it's not easy at all. I do recognize that. But this is one of those things, kind of like water, that so many of us use, sometimes without even realizing or thinking about it. And when you take the cost of that thing and you dramatically reduce it, that doesn't sound like a huge problem to me, or certainly not a reason to blame for market sell-offs. And then China, I just want to mention in closing, China is a competitor of the United States of America, and China is a wonderful competitor. As a basketball fan myself, I apologize for people that I'm going to miss with this analogy. I went to the University of North Carolina, which has an outstanding college basketball tradition and some national championships over the years. We have a great rival in Duke University, about 10 miles away from Chapel Hill. And Duke University also has a great tradition of winning basketball games. And the two are really great rivals. And I love the rivalry. And I hate a lot about Duke basketball, even though I greatly admire Duke basketball. But that's sort of how it should be, I think, between the U.S. and China. I think both should be great players, trying really hard, and both are always going to be competing. So I think the best situation of all is when both are doing very well. So when one of them doesn't do very well, I do think that hurts, whether it's college basketball, if Duke loses 4 out of 5 games, which it, by the way, has, or if it's business, if China is having a really tough time. At the same time, part of me thinks, well, we are competing against them. They're not doing so well. So that's not bad for us necessarily either. So I think a lot of other countries, certainly the U.S., as a great innovator, can step in and fill voids if China is slowing down in some ways. So that doesn't sound like really bad news to me either. It is mildly bad, and I always wish for good things for all people, and better global business equals better prosperity among all countries. But it's interesting for me to think about all the volatility and sell-off in the market when there are a couple of factors that sound non-bad to me that are regularly referenced as the reason that the market is so bad right now.
As always, people on this program may have interest in the stocks they talk about, and the Motley Fool may have formal recommendations for or against. So don't buy or sell stocks based solely on what you hear. Learn more about rule breaker investing at rbi.fool.com.